So this is where we left the character previously. We've got the base texture in place and we've added the occlusion maps which we baked out. You can see I've also added a very basic texture to the hair, and this is also multiplied with the occlusion map which I baked out for just one single strip. And as you can see, we've got some nice depth just by adding that lighting information in. And this scene is just shown without any lighting. If I turn on the default lighting, you can see we set it to no lights just so we can concentrate purely on the texture. Now let's switch to Photoshop, and here you can see we have our texture map here. And what I've done, and this PSD will be supplied with the files that come with this tutorial, we have our base colours, which are these, which we baked out originally, and they're on a separate layer separated from the background. We also have a detail group, and I'll talk about that shortly. These as well, these are just for generating normal maps and specular maps. And here we have our lighting. Now at the moment we have two versions of the occlusion map. One which is set to an overlay. If I turn these off, like so, and that's just at 50%. If we set that up to 100%, you can see it's quite blown out and a bit too much, so we're just having that at about 50%. And then I've added another copy of the occlusion map over the top, and this time with a multiply blending mode, and again just adjusting the opacity to get the shadows and the lighting contrast that I want. Now these two here I've just stripped out from the normal map, so I've taken the blue channel here. If I add that, and all that is doing is taking this depth information and overlaying it on top, again just to give us more depth. Turn that back to multiply, and the same with the green channel. If you see when I add this on top, it's just adding in this extra layer of detail where the creases are, and on the fingers. Again, just adjust another layer of detail there, and that's just taking the green channel from the normal map and again using an overlay, and you can adjust the opacity again there. So if I save that out and we switch back to Maya again, we'll just see what adding those extra couple of maps, if I reload in the texture, has just done. So you see there, as it's popped in, it's just enhanced the creases and just added another layer of depth. Now you will need to go in and touch up the maps slightly, because some areas of the normal maps won't work depending on how you have your UV layout, UVs laid out. So you may need to go in and touch a few areas up. These areas like the fingers here, they may be a bit too dark, but we can fix those later on as I'll show you in the next video. So what do we need to do next? Well, we have our base colour, we have our lighting pass. Now we could effectively leave this as it is. If I go back to here, now as you can see we've got this detail here, and that's because I've got ahead of myself, and the normal map we've added in some of the details which I haven't even talked about yet. So let's quickly turn off the lighting and look at the details that I've added in here. Now these are just separate layers, all just added on top of the base map using different blending modes to get the effects that you need. So if I turn that on like so, you can see these other layers which we've just added in on top, and I'll quickly go through them. Let's just zoom in slightly so you can see them a bit more. Now again, you can do a lot more to the texture than this, but I'm just showing you the basics, and then I'll encourage you to then go on and enhance this even more. So let's just turn all these off and we'll just discuss what we've got. So the trim basically just goes around the poncho. A dirt layer, now as you can see, this is just a texture that I've just brought in and overlaid. That just breaks up the surface nicely for us and just gets rid of that soft and clean look. A steel layer, now that's just again pasted over the elements which are metallic, like on the shoulder pad here. Again, a leather layer just overlaid. A pattern onto his belt here, and again that's just a cross, nothing complicated or fancy about that. Another texture overlaid onto his shirt, and then one on his bandana. Now these are quite faint, and that's because I'm going to use those, which I'll show you again in a second, and I'm going to have those stronger in the specular map, so they are actually, when the light passes over them, they'll show up more in the highlight. And again, another layer, just adding that sort of stitched cloth, cotton sort of effect to these areas here. Again, enhancing that childlike look of the character. Worn leather. Now this is just to give the edges of the leather a worn look, to make him look like they're less brand new and more like they've been used. And again, you can enhance this much further later on. And there's just another copy of the worn leather texture, which I've overlaid just to enhance that a little bit more. So there we have our detail maps. And that's just enhanced that texture very quickly, just taking textures, overlaying them. So if we add that to our lighting map, you can see there we've already started to build up quite a detailed texture without much hard work. Now it's not very difficult, just cutting out, overlaying, playing around with the different materials and textures, etc. And it's from here, now you've got these bases in place, that you can then go forward and go in with your Wacom tablet and start to paint in extra details if you want to. Like the belts here, they're quite plain, so you may want to go in, add a bit more detail onto those. Now I'll go back to the specular map which I mentioned earlier, and here I have another group just with the specular map sitting in it, just so we can look at it. And as you can see, the lighter areas are going to be shinier, the darker areas are going to be duller. So the pattern on his bandana and his poncho here, they're brighter because, as I said before, when the light casts over them, they will shine and be more obvious. If we compare that with the map before, you can hardly see them here. So again, when the light passes over them, they'll show up, and it'll just make those areas a little bit more interesting. We have our skin tones, which have got that blue sort of specular colour that skin usually has. And it's basically just taking the elements from the detail map, putting them into another group, and then building up the texture that way. The same with the normal map. What we've done here is we've taken those details again, and we've created a height map from them. This can then be taken into a application like Crazy Bump, or even Smart Normal, which is an online version of the app, and used to combine with your base map to then add another detail layer. Excuse me. And that is what you saw on the lighting map when I brought in the green and the blue normal maps here. And that's where that detail had come from before. So if I save this as it is now with all these extra layers on top, we go back into Maya, let's reload that again. So here he is. As you can see, we've got that fabric detail there. There's a bit of stretching here, but we're not too worried about that. We could go in and we could tweak the actual texture on there. But at the end of the day, what we've got here is we've got all the bases, and we've got a great starting point. If you like him as he is now, you could leave him and then pass him on as done. But as you can see, we've got a great starting point for his texture. Now in the image that comes with this, you'll notice he has a sword, and he has his eyes, and he has his a bandana. Now I've got those in this scene. I will just bring those back like so. So this is what you'll be looking at. If we turn off the if we turn on the lighting, should I say, use default lighting, and we'll turn on high quality rendering, just so we can see him with the normal maps applied as well. And there we go. So as you can see, it's looking quite nice. And all those subtle details have just helped to enhance the base texture and the normal map as well. And here we have his sword, which is, again, we've just created in much the same way as we did with him. Just starting off with primitives, building the main shape, then exporting a version of the sword with one subdivision, optimizing that down, and then projecting all your maps across after you've UV'd it. Exactly the same process we did for this little guy, but just done to his sword. And like I say, that's you can see that in the main render. So from here, you could essentially pass this off as done. You could say that guy's finished, let's get him rigged in the game, running around, and we'll see what he looks like. And we can then continue on and polish the textures and enhance him a bit more. And for this tutorial, we could leave this here and say we're finished, but there's just one more step that I want to go through, and that's to take this version into another application called 3D Coat. Some of you may have used it. And what we can do with that then is we can paint onto the actual model, and we can add to the normal map, we can add to the diffuse map, we can paint in more details. We can basically take this a lot further by interactively painting onto the model. And that is where we will go in the next video.